Hello, Verida, and welcome to another episode of Life Inside Verida. We have some special guests with us today here from Provider Relations, our Provider Relations managers from the state of Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, in Indiana, and Arkansas. Welcome, everyone. We are going to talk a little bit about provider relations and what the team does in the various operations around our enterprise. And so we're going to ask a few questions and get a few answers, and we hope that you all, as our listening audience, will be able to get a little bit more information about what this great team does out in the field for the company and how they work with our transportation providers and do a lot more. So without further ado, what I'd like to do now is introduce our team of guests, and I'll start with Indiana first. Just tell us your name, your title, and your state of operation.
James Simmons, Provider Relations Manager, Indiana.
Thank you, James. Let's go with Louisiana, Mississippi.
Hi, I'm Tammy Sanford, and I work with providers in the great states of Mississippi and Louisiana.
All right. How about Arkansas?
I'm Cindy Washington, and I am the state director, and I work with the providers as the provider relationship manager here in Arkansas.
All right. And we've got a duo for Tennessee. John?
John Whitehead, Provider Relations Manager for Tennessee East.
Keith?
And Heath Williams, Provider and Facilities Relations Manager for Tennessee West.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Now, we're going to jump in and start our conversation and talk a little bit more about provider relations and what you guys do. So what I'd like to do is start off with our first question, which is, what does a provider relations manager do in Verida? Would anybody like to maybe start?
Sure. Here in Arkansas, we work on onboarding new providers. We work with existing providers if they have any concerns or any issues that they need me to address with corporate.
Thank you. Yeah, anyone else?
So basically, the provider relations manager is the liaison and the point of contact for the transportation providers with not only everyone at Verida, but also with the members and the facilities, family members, our state clients, everybody. Any issue that the provider has, we are the person they come to for help in resolving whatever issue or concern that they have. We are also responsible for monitoring their performance to make sure that they're meeting the contractual requirements and holding up basically our end of the deal in our contracts to make sure that members have safe, reliable transports to and from their appointments.
Yeah, provider relations is such a critical and pivotal part of the operation because there again, you all are responsible for those transportation providers that are getting our members to their appointments. I guess, that process of getting the right transportation providers in is important, as well as once you get them in, having that relationship as you go through the process of day-to-day transportation. So thank you all for that intro on what you guys do. Now, next, I'd like to maybe ask a question about the provider network. You talked about being able to get transportation providers and building them in a network because, of course, as a company, we would consider ourselves as a transportation broker. We don't necessarily provide the vehicles and the drivers in the states that we service, but we actually build a network of local providers. So maybe could you all give us a little bit more detail about what is a provider network, why is it needed, and what's the process that you all go through to build that network up?
Sure, I'll take that one. So we have what we call demand, which is the membership throughout the state and their need for transportation. And we compare that demand to the capacity that we have available in every area of the state that we oversee. And in areas where we have a capacity deficit in comparison to the demand, we seek to add providers to that area. In an area where we have a capacity overload in comparison to the demand, then we would not want to add more providers, because you don't want to have providers that you bring into your network, they spend the money to remain compliant, but you don't have trips to give them. So they don't have any return on their investment. So we seek out transportation companies in areas where we need their help in meeting our demand.
And I'll say in Tennessee, John and I work really close together. A lot of times we have existing providers that want to expand, and they'll come and ask, like, where's a good area or where would you like to go? And so John and I have frequent conversations about, what mobility type we've got and where we'd like them to go, so that, to Tammy's point earlier, we're not just putting a bunch of people in an area that we don't have trips for. So, like I said, we constantly have meetings with the providers and with new providers coming on about where the best place is to go. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be working with them every day. And that's what I try to explain to them when I talk to them. Like, I would never tell you something that I'm not going to be able to follow up with, because at the end of the day, I want you to be happy and I want you to be successful. And the only way I can do that is to give you the best information that I've got to begin with. So yeah, we that's certainly something that we focus on a lot, is trying to get the right providers in the right areas.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it's, I guess it's, of course, contractual as well. That when we say come into a new state with a new contract, that we use local transportation providers versus, say, for example, bringing transportation providers from another state. That's part of the economic development of that state, is to be able to use those local businesses there. And so, Heath, when you talk about making sure you're taking care of the transportation providers, and Tammy, you're talking about making sure we put them in a particular territory where they can be utilized. Those are all important things. And I assume that, there's a constant balance of that. Is that correct? Trying to ensure that, you've got enough, or where you've got too many, you're trying to balance it off and shift.
So yeah, there's a constant fluctuation. The membership changes, demand for the membership changes in their utilization. Providers add vehicles. They have accidents and lose vehicles. They have vehicles that maybe the transmission goes out, so their fleet loses capacity. And they have drivers that quit, or drivers that get sick and have to be out for an extended period. So not only does your demand fluctuate, but your capacity fluctuates as well. So it's a daily balancing act.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Keith, if I could interject as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do in every state is we work very closely with compliance. So there's that balance that includes, you've got compliance on one end, looking at vehicles, looking at driver qualifications, the training. Compliance is there for a good reason, but they may remove someone from the network temporarily. Either a vehicle is no longer qualified to be in the network, or a driver has lost some kind of a credentialing or certification. So there's that part of it as well, that balance. And also, we work very closely with the providers using their scorecards. So we're talking to them constantly about their score, which includes on-time performance. That's a real big component, a real big key.
And John, of course, you all are in Tennessee. Of course, James, maybe you can talk a little bit about Indiana, because you all sort of split up your territory between you and Temple.
Yeah, so, and we kind of split it up based on number of providers. So Temple kind of handles, so we have 10 regions in Indiana, and I've got 8 of them. Temple handles Central Indiana and a little bit to the west. And the reason for that is there's more providers in that area equivalent to the rest of the state. So that's kind of how we have it split up. So we do a lot of traveling. So I'm north and south of the state, so there's a lot of traveling involved. But yeah, that's how we split up our region. So it's pretty equivalent to the number of providers we have. It's just kind of based on where we travel to.
Okay. And Heath and John, you all are split up east and west. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I-24 kind of runs up the Chattanooga through Nashville, and so that's kind of our corridor to split. Nashville's always kind of tricky when we get new people coming in because well, you take this one or you take this one, depending on how many people are onboarding at the time or what the situation is. But yeah, I mean, so Nashville is one that we frequently will kind of end up there together at, either the same time or different times in that area. And then I travel all the way to Memphis, and then he goes up to goodness knows the mountains up in East Tennessee, up in Bristol, way up there. Yes. I tend to stick to the city life people, and John tends to be more out in the country up there. So. But yeah, so we kind of split that 24 up the state where
excellent.
I handle the west side and he handles the east side.
Cool.
And we also have providers, Keith, that may operate in Tennessee and in Mississippi.
Absolutely.
Or that may operate in Mississippi and in Louisiana, or even with Cindy and I, providers that operate in Louisiana and Arkansas, or Mississippi and Arkansas. So even though we're all separate. Yeah,
I can tell you all the places to eat in Olive Branch, Mississippi. I've been there plenty of times. So
that's right. So even though we're all separate contracts, where those providers are close to the state line, they operate with both of us. Yeah.
That's cool. So so we've got
states.
sort of like this tri-state thing going on, huh? Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that it does get a little tricky sometimes because you've got to make sure that you're onboarded in each state and establish the business in each state in order to cross over and transport. But absolutely, yeah, especially like Timmy was saying that Olive Branch to Memphis is like 12 miles. And so we have a lot of people in that area that don't necessarily live in Memphis but want to transport there.
But I bet that's helpful too. When you need someone and maybe your capacity is a little low, you might be able to reach over to Mississippi or to Arkansas and get that additional help you need.
Yeah, and I would say,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I know it's helped Arkansas a lot with there's a stretcher for our well care. We use a provider that's in Memphis. So whenever we have that, so it does help out a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know Tammy sent quite a few up to us. So.
Well, that's good. That's teamwork. And Tammy and Cindy, of course, you all have dual roles, as we know. You're state directors, and you provide the services for transportation providers and the relations there. So tell me about that and being able to balance that with what you have going on. And Tammy, of course, you're sort of going between Louisiana and Mississippi, but I know you have your hands full.
I think we always do, don't we, Cindy?
Oh, yes.
We work together a lot. If one of us gets behind in something, we reach out to the other one and say, and Steve Buckner is also here in Louisiana. And we reach out to each other and say, hey, we need a little help with this. And so even though each operation is a separate entity, we do all work together and help each other. Sometimes it is very helpful to have the state director and the provider relations role because you get to see both sides. You get to see what the state client is saying about this particular provider. And so in your provider relations role, you can address things more directly. Sometimes it makes it harder because you hear things as a state director that you can't necessarily pass on to your provider. But you have to treat the provider according to what you learn as a state director. And so it's a fine line to walk. cost is impacted, you have to, push the cost line with the providers based on things you learn as a state director, and that makes it a little difficult. The provider knows it's all about you. You can't say, well, the state director says we can't do this, and lay it off on somebody else. They know it's all you.
Yeah.
And but it's about relationships too. When you build that solid relationship, I mean, I've been doing this for 20 something years, and well, for almost 20 years, not 20 something, for right at 20 years. And I've worked with a lot of providers in a lot of states, and all my providers know I'll be here tomorrow to back up what I tell you today. And that's important. And when you build that relationship, even when you have to push those hard lines with them, they trust you and they know that you're doing what you have to do, and that if they have an issue, you're going to resolve it. Even if it may not be exactly what they want to hear, they know you're going to get an answer for them. And so the relationship is the foundation, no matter which role you hold. But yeah, as having to do multiple roles, and Cindy and I aren't just state directors and provider relations managers. We're facility outreach and dispatch managers, and we do it all.
Yes.
And
you're superheroes, right?
Yeah.
I think we're like Dory in Finding Nemo. We just keep swimming.
And Arkansas is really, Arkansas can test you a lot because, as Tammy knows from when she came up here to help, it takes a long time to onboard a provider here in Arkansas. So you have to build that relationship. And with now I've become also the facility outreach manager. The facilities really keep you busy.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just rapport with them, and getting them the answers they need and getting their issues resolved.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I tell you what, let's move to another question. And we've talked a little bit about this, but maybe we can talk a little bit in detail. The question is, how do you handle trip demands where they're having enough providers or sometimes not enough to handle trips in your territory, where that might be a challenge? How do you handle that?
Well, I'll speak for Tennessee. We spend a lot of time meeting with our dispatch team, with our state director, with our call center director, call center manager. So, we've got a couple scheduled meetings a week, but we have lots of other kind of impromptu meetings to discuss that very thing. We spent 3 hours on a Saturday, a month and a half, 2 months ago, going over the dispatch process. How are we doing it? Who are we looking at? What's the best way to, utilize our providers? Because to your point, there's only a finite number of providers, and we got to figure out how to best utilize them. If we need somebody to travel 300 miles to pick up somebody, that's great. We get that person picked up, but who are we leaving behind if we're going that far away and we have to send somebody else back to get the people that they could have picked up to begin with? So, like I said, we spend a lot of time with our dispatch team. We talk about individual providers. We talk about capacity all the time. John and I are meeting with the providers as well, talking about, hey, we might want to be able to put some more volume up here. Do you think you can handle the volume? Because a lot of the providers, they're willing to help as long as they know there's work out there. They don't want to, go in and add 2 or 3 drivers and then find out there's not work from us. So we certainly want to make sure that, we're supplying that or as best we can, letting them know what we need. And like I said, the providers are really good about that, coming back with us and saying, yeah, we'll add somebody up there for you, or, we'll do something like that. But like I said, our biggest thing is really the constant communication with our own team to make sure that we as a group are utilizing them as best possible.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Let me ask you all, how do you manage recruiting new providers? Is it easy or challenging, or both?
I think it's a mix. In some, like in Louisiana, for example, some of our regions we need to add providers, and some of our regions we don't, because we have so many. And the providers that you reject when they apply can get angry because you're rejecting them. And then the providers in the areas where you need more providers, it can be difficult to find those additional providers or to get the providers there to expand or to get providers from other areas to move into those. Like here, it's the more rural areas or the areas where maybe they have to go across the big bridges, where if a single wreck can back you up for 3 or 4 hours because it's a 2-lane bridge and it's 5 miles long. So that makes it a little difficult here in Mississippi. It's a little difficult because we don't have the trip volume in Mississippi to support a provider in every county, whereas here in Louisiana, we have almost 300 providers. We need multiple providers in every parish. But in Mississippi, we only need a handful of providers in each region because of our trip volume. And so those providers have to be willing to run their trips locally for the other broker and also go out of area and run individual trips for us. And it's kind of hard to find providers who have that amount of flexibility in their fleet. They have to have a lot of vehicles and a lot of drivers to be able to have that kind of flexibility. So that makes it pretty difficult.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. Let me ask you this question. In terms of what kind of experience is needed to be a good provider relations manager? Would you say if there's someone out listening and saying, I'd love to be a part of the provider relations manager's team, what type of experience would you recommend?
I'll kind of jump on that, Keith. I come from a history of marketing and sales, but marketing sales within healthcare and healthcare transportation at that. So I think, all of those areas kind of helped me with what I've been able to do with Verida. Being able to negotiate, being able to meet in person, talk face to face, all of those kind of combined organizational skills, I think really help too, because you're dealing with so many providers and they have so many issues in any given day or week. So being able to make sure you're getting all your providers following up with all of those, I think, are important to have in this role.
So you better be a multitasker.
Yeah, I said if you can juggle water, right? If you can juggle water, then you're perfect for this role. So, but I think what Tammy spoke about earlier was the thing. It's about relationships. I know John Fink talked to us when John and I got hired pretty close together, and it was really about building those relationships because, to Tammy's point earlier, there's a lot of difficult conversations you have to have from time to time, but they know that you've got their best interest in mind, and they know that you're working with them. And the only way to do that is, like we were talking about earlier, get in front of them, go see them, be on the phone with them, build that relationship. Because again, as long as you're doing that, usually everything else is going to be okay, because they know at the end of the day, like I said, you're looking out for them, and that's, we are their advocate. I will say John and I sometimes probably are more of their advocate than we're supposed to be. We get kind of slapped on our hand every once in a while, like, well, we know what John and Heath are going to say because they're provider relations managers. Like, well, of course, that's what we do. So we are always looking out for the providers. But I think building that relationship is the biggest key to being successful in this role.
Fantastic. Let's talk about the departments that you work with during a typical day. Maybe give us a little bit of insight on what that looks like. Anybody want to kind of share the various groups you work with within Verida?
We work with finance, compliance, dispatch, even with customer service. Because if a trip is not set up right from the start, then ultimately it gets to the provider wrong. And so I think we work with every different department, from start to finish, from the setup to the payout.
Yeah. Wow.
And
don't want to leave out marketing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You guys were.
And in Arkansas, we have to deal a lot with, because as you know, we have a lot of drivers and vehicles.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you all. Thank you all. Let's talk about facilities. Facilities depend on providers to get members to their locations. Can you talk about your involvement with facilities?
Well, I have a lot of involvement with facilities. We do a lot of daycare programs here in Arkansas, and when they have any type of concerns, they're emailing me, they're calling me, and we just work really close. I work really close to them to get it resolved with them, the provider, and if the provider is Verida, of course, with my fleet manager.
Wow, excellent.
Yeah, as I say, so when John and I are out in the field, we are also visiting facilities as well. Some we, pre-schedule, some as we're, in the area, we just pop in. But I will say overwhelmingly, they have positive things to say about us, and they're always super grateful for us to come by and give them a name with a face and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, we are constantly working with facilities, and to the point earlier, yeah, if they're reaching out and they need somebody to come by, we're let's get in the car and let's go see them and talk to them and figure out how to get any of their issues resolved that we can.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, working with facilities, like you said, it's there's a lot of trips for members to facilities constantly, day after day after day, and just being able to be that support mechanism for them, I think, is extremely important.
And in Tennessee, we're actually, I'm sure probably other states too, but some of the facilities are transporting their own members. So we're helping them get set up so that they can be a provider to be able to transport their own members. So we do that as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Wow. Let's talk, with the constant workload, is there a time to acknowledge your providers? And if so, how do you do it, when they do a great job?
I think we handle that when we have the monthly performance reviews. Some providers need a little guidance in certain areas, whether they're having too many baits or too many no-shows. Other providers are performing exceptionally well, and it's always a good time when we're handing out those performance reviews to take that opportunity and tell them, hey, you're doing great. Or if they take a trip that's been really hard for dispatch to cover, I always encourage dispatch to let me know when something like that happens so that I can mention it to them and say, hey, I heard you took a trip that dispatch had a lot of trouble with the other day. I really appreciate that. But always during that monthly performance time.
Oh, that's great.
And a lot of times, too, in the provider meetings that we have, we'll acknowledge them at that time as well.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll send out, I try to keep in touch with the providers weekly, whether it's, I know a couple of people talked about it earlier, reports or non-compliant sendbacks or, anything. And if I see an improvement, I'll always try to reach out and say, thanks for your improvement. We've noticed it, they've noticed it. And, they're always really responsive to that. Along with the other side of that, being out face-to-face meeting with providers, a lot of times they'll compliment our people or our dispatchers. So I think that's always nice as well to be able to provide that feedback to our local people from the provider.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit, and I've actually asked this question with all the guests that we've had on our podcast show. And James, you may be a little bit, you may not have been here when, of course, COVID hit back in 2020, but a number of you all were. And I know that must have been a challenge for you. How did you make things work through the adversity of COVID during that time?
So in 2020, when the shelter at home movement started, we transitioned our agents to a work from home setting. Thankfully, IT was tremendous in getting everybody set up to work from home. In Mississippi, we actually closed our office and put everything in a storage unit. And we were able to eliminate that overhead. Here in Louisiana, we had just moved into a new office. We had only been here a couple of months, so we were fresh into the lease, and we were not able to eliminate the lease, but we still were able to transition everybody to a work from home setting. IT, I think, took the brunt of that transition, and we did have to maintain the office space here in Louisiana. We are back in office now, but along with moving everybody to a work from home remote setting, we had members that had to be transported in different ways. Our gas reimbursement picked up because members didn't want to ride with other people. We all know this is a multi-load ride share program, but members didn't want to be exposed. So the gas reimbursement picked up, and they were self-transporting or having friends and family transport them. We had members that would have to ride in an isolated situation, and so our ambulance transports increased, which increased the cost. We had situations where facilities would not allow members to enter the facility until their room was open, which required that members who were on our program sheltered outside the facility until they were able to come in. So the drivers had to learn to communicate with the facility and say, hey, this member is part of a multi-load program, a rideshare program, and I can't wait with them. If you don't allow them to come in, they're going to have to shelter outside. So we had to learn to work through that and kind of change our parameters that the driver had to see the member safely enter the location before they could leave. We had to waive the requirement for the members to sign when they exited the vehicle, because that was a way that germs were transmitted, and everybody touching the tablet or touching the paperwork. So a lot of things had to change, and staff had to learn new protocols. The drivers had to learn new protocols, and even the riders had to learn new protocols. But we muddled through it. We developed new processes and protocols, and now we're coming out of it, and we're learning again new ways to do things, because everything didn't go back to the way it was before. It's a new way all over again.
Wow, thanks, Tammy. Yeah, it's interesting because during that time, I know as well, with you guys and relationships being the key, meeting with transportation providers and having those relationships. Facility outreach managers were the same way, because I can remember them having to switch from not being able to go out and do those visits to facilities, but instead we started utilizing Zoom a whole lot more, and we started creating these meetings and lunch and learns where they would have the opportunity to connect with facilities, virtually. And it certainly helped during that time. But like you said, my hat's off to you guys, because I know that you had a lot to deal with in a short period of time to figure out how to do it a different way. So kudos to all of you. Now, I've got just a few more questions I want to ask. Maybe tell me about, I know a big part of your role is being a negotiator, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about that without giving away any secrets, but it is important to be a negotiator in your role.
The biggest thing is, of course, negotiating rates. That is the biggest thing here in Arkansas. A lot of them don't like the rates, but if you'll show them, where they can make the money with the rates that you offer, it helps a lot.
That's great. That's great.
It does. And we typically get a rate range to use, with the bottom of the range and the top of the range, and where everybody typically falls within the range. And we negotiate based on the geographic area of the provider their fleet size, their experience level, the mobility types that they're offering. An AMB-only provider with 2 vehicles isn't going to be offered the same rates as a provider that has 15 vehicles in their fleet and half of those are wheelchair accessible.
Right.
They're just not going to be offered the same rates. And so we have to have the knowledge of our rate range and the geographic knowledge of our state to know, well, in this geographic area, this provider is going to have to pay their drivers more than a provider in this geographic area. So I need to consider that when I'm looking at rates for this provider.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty complex. So my last couple of questions. One is, how do you keep your network robust and your performance at top levels? And my other question is, maybe tell me what's the best part of your job, and maybe share a testimonial about something that's happened over the time that you've been a provider relations manager.
Well, I'll start with what's the best part of your job. It's the relationship piece. I mean, the people you get to meet, like in our Nashville area, I've met people from Jordan, Somalia, like all over the world, and get to hear all kinds of super cool stories. And the other part that's the best part of our job is really getting to find out, like, why these people are doing it. You get to know their family members. I mean, you get to, sit in their house and they tell you about their dog or how they got in the business and those kind of things. And so I think, honestly, that part of the relationship really puts, I say it all the time, they're a spreadsheet and there's a name on there, but that's not who they are. And so, that's something to keep in mind. And I will quite honestly say, like, when things come up, yeah, I'm very empathetic to the providers most of the time because, again, I know their backstory. I know what they're doing it for. I know why they're in the business. I know like I said, I've seen pictures of their kids, or they told me about their, past, history or life, whatever. So the best part is just building those relationships with those people and getting to know them. And like I said, they're not a name on a spreadsheet. It's somebody that's, that's trying to, take care of their family and take care of their employees. So I think that's the best part for me.
Oh, thanks, Heath.
I agree.
Yeah, for me too. There was a couple in Mississippi that came to me because they wanted to start a transportation company. And when they came to me, she was pregnant, the wife, and she had this little girl in diapers and pigtails. And they started their transportation company. They got everything going, and it was either last year or the year before that little girl graduated from high school, and I got to see her graduation pictures, and we've been friends through all those years. So you build lasting relationships.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. Well, with that said, I want to thank all of you for being a part of our podcast today. I think it was fantastic to just get a little nugget about what happens in provider relations. And I think you all have shared some wonderful stories, great experience, and information about what goes on. So we appreciate your time and your expertise, and of course, everything you do for Verida. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and close out our podcast. To everyone out there listening and watching, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.